You are watching Creative Quarantine. I'm your host, Angélique Roché, and I am here with one of the dopest writers in the game, in the comics. You right there. Huh. Vita Ayala. What's up, Vita?
All good, all good. As much as possible
As much
in
as
these
can be
times.
possible. Yeah. And I would be remiss not to start the show off by saying today is a rough day in New York today.
Yeah.
Today is a real rough day in New York right now. Um,
Sorry, that's my alarm.
Platform. Um, Today is a real rough day in New York right now, and I think we kind of want to acknowledge a lot of folks are hurting, a lot of things are happening, and epicenters around the country right now in Detroit, in New Orleans, in Cali, and all these places, and that we are both very blessed to be right here, both well and healthy to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's we are starting to reach the peak, or the first peak, in New York. It's a city of 9 million people. There are pretty much sirens going almost nonstop in my neighborhood. There's actually a quiet patch right now, which is that's nice. But yeah, it's pretty rough in New York. And not enough people take it seriously at first. Now they are starting to take it more seriously. But
Talk
um,
to me about how everything has kind of been, because we're in our third week of creative quarantine, which a lot of folks when we first started was like, oh, three weeks. Oh, you're booked all the way out to May, and I was like, yes, because I'm encouraging all of you to stay in your homes,
inside, please stay
stay in your
inside.
homes. But it's definitely when we first talked about the show, and we first like set the date. It was even a different world 2 weeks ago.
I mean, day to day, things are changing and developing, and things are shifting. It feels like there's no real foundation anymore in which to contextualize the world, like at all. Um, but you know, I've been inside for a month now, actually. Like, I went into isolation earlier, not because I had anything, but I had traveled pretty recently. I traveled to C2E2, the first and only convention of this year, comic
The
convention.
first and only comic convention of 2020.
Um,
Congratulations, you two, you two.
it was something. And so I was like, ooh, people aren't taking it seriously, but I always get very ill when something is going around, so I'm just gonna stay inside and make sure I'm not passing germs back and forth. And then I just I'm not going outside anymore. I mean, we have our building has like a backyard that's like very small, so we go outside for like air. But yeah, otherwise I'm upstairs. I feel like someone in a like a Victorian novel.
Well, and the ironic thing is, like, we've talked to a number of folks across the country. But one of the interesting things, and we've talked about this a lot, you're from New York, so this is something for you. I think that is interestingly important because you are from the city. You know, what do you think? Like, and I know we talk about people weren't taking seriously in the beginning. Like, what are we seeing now?
There's still not enough people taking it seriously, in my opinion. But for weeks, up until pretty much this week, there were people just outside hanging out, like in groups on sidewalks in the street because they were off of work and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna hang out and have a good time." And like, like there's nothing wrong with taking a walk. That's not what I'm saying. Wear a mask though, please wear a mask. But they were just, when we've been doing grocery runs, my wife and I, like once a week, unless we really need something that's perishable. And like, there are just people without masks, without any protective gear, walking right to you, like not even trying to like, do the thing where you veer 6 feet apart, like none of that. Pretty much until this week, which is pretty disconcerting. And apparently, I mean, not a lot of laundromats in the area have closed down. Like, not all of them, but a lot of them have, and some of them now are refusing to do drop-off service, which I was like, no, the drop-off service is what you should be doing. So
That's
that no one is
actually the jam.
in there. So that's packed. Like, and people are just packing into laundromats because it's, again, a city of 9 million, and many, many, many of the buildings aren't even allowed to have like
Laundromats, yeah. Or they're retrofitted and they just don't have the capacity.
That's the case for some of them. You know, it depends on where you are. Like I know, or you know, you could be living in a building where you technically can have one in your home, but you can't afford it because they're expensive. So there's all kinds of like, I don't know. It's been interesting. Now I see a lot less people walking by, pretty much only people with their dogs or people that are clearly like together and wearing masks and stuff, which is nice. This has really changed a lot. You know, New Yorkers are walking people, and like to see just like empty streets, it's pretty wild. My mom is like a walking person, which stresses me out because she's been going out on walks every day, and she's like a 70-year-old immunocompromised Puerto Rican. I'm like, please, no. She has like a mask, but still, I'm like,
but no,
please don't. But she's been taking pictures in like ghost town, like absolute ghost town.
Well, and I think it's interesting because, you know, one of the things that we've been having conversations about in the last couple of weeks is the construction of stories. And I've had this conversation with a couple of different, both on and off camera, a couple of different guests about how if we were to write this story right now, it would be workshopped. Like if you were to write the facts, like not you make up a story and this is it, but if you were to write the actual facts of the story of what's happening right now,
I wouldn't believe it.
No, and it would be workshopped a lot, right? Like even the dialogue from elected officials has been so surreal.
That the dialogue between people that are, it's real wild. Like I'm watching, you know, news stuff, and I'm like, you couldn't write this because your editor would absolutely just scrap it. Like there's no way. Like you could not like any, especially like not just our president, but like just these high level world leaders where you're just like, how is this what you're saying out loud? This is I think I read this in my freshman like writing course in like college. Like, you know what I mean? Like this is real wild. Yeah, I wouldn't believe any of this.
So for you as a writer, I know that you normally write alone. You do have some partners that you have written with, collaborations, mostly digital. And for the folks who might just be getting to know your work, like you mainly write comics. But to be clear, in like the explosion that has been the very short time of your career, you have written for every major comic house there is.
Is that true?
Almost.
Maybe.
So,
yeah.
DC,
almost.
Marvel, Valiant.
Yeah. I've been blessed to be able to have stuff published through Image and Dark Horse as well. And IDW. Yeah, I guess so. Except for Boom. Not Boom.
Boom. Get your shit together.
Right now we're all just trying to make it through the day.
And I think one of the things, and I would be remiss to talk about this, is like there's been a large impact on writers, but also a large impact on the comic book industry when it comes to local comic book stores, like right now. And I think it's really been rough, right? Because local comic book stores really that Wednesday walk-in, those pickups are such a big, huge deal. But how for you has it been with this adjustment of, because you still have projects, like you are still writing scripts right now.
I am still writing scripts right now. It's unclear about when and how they will come out. But I am grateful that there are companies still paying freelancers because I am full-time freelance. I didn't have a day job to begin with. I mean, I did, but then I was blessed enough to be able to go full-time freelance. So it's very precarious. I mean, the comic book industry in terms of the direct market it was already extremely precarious. Like the profit margin on a retail store is like tiny. And not being able to get rid of inventory but still having to pay rent is really crippling to the industry. Retail in general, but certainly places like independent bookstores and local comic book shops are they're already on a thread. So there's a lot of people thinking behind the scenes of how can we help these local comic book shops make it to when they can reopen again for business.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't know your background. You have worked in a number of different comic book seller type systems,
for sure.
right? And so, you know, for folks out there who are curious, because a lot of people who are new to comics don't necessarily understand the bigger system of pre-orders, or understand the bigger system of what does it mean to have a pull list. Like, there's a whole vernacular of comic books a lot of people aren't necessarily, I hate to say hip to, because it just makes me sound old, but I'm going to say it anyway, that they're not hip to. And so what have you seen has been the trends? Have you seen anything that you feel like folks can do or folks can explore, particularly as they're looking for more content, which comic books have a plethora and literally have something for everyone?
Yes, I think the foundation of it too is that in the general mainstream, comics are thought of as a genre and not a medium, but comics are a medium, right? There are as many comics as there are things in the world. And there are still a lot of comic book shops that are operating in kind of lateral ways, right? So one of the things that I've been involved in, which is spearheaded by Leah Williams, who writes for Marvel, and Liana Kangas, who has drawn a bunch of stuff, including, you know, we did a book together, is this project called the Comics Industry Collective, which is just, half of it is a resource for people looking for comic book shops that are still operating, you know, to some capacity, and I can give you the web address.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll put that in the podcast information.
All right, awesome.
When it goes out tomorrow.
It's 28pages.com, I believe. 28 the number, and then pages.com. I didn't come up with that, but it is very good.
I mean, is it 28? Is it 22? Is it, what is it? Is it?
I thought it was a clever pun on the movie, but that's just
I love it. You know, it's great.
But this is a resource. Basically, the front end of it is a map. It's like it's a Google map with information on every shop that's still operating and what they're offering, what COVID services that they're offering. So a lot of people are doing shipping. They're still able to go, you know, a staff member is able to go into the store and ship out like their comics or toys or whatever they have. Some people are still in states that aren't shelter in, so they're able to do curbside pickup, which means they literally, you prepay and they put it on the curb and then you come get it and go away. There's some personal shopping options, that kind of stuff. So that has been I think, taken a lot of my mental energy. And now what's happening is they're moving on to adding more kinds of resources for retailers, for customers, and for comic creators, because the industry runs on freelancers. And a lot of companies are unfortunately not able to continue to have people work while things are so unstable, which is understandable, but it leaves a lot of us in kind of a lurch. So there's all kinds of stuff happening and being put up on the site to try and centralize information, but also to make sure that it's like vetted information.
That's really amazing. So we will make sure that we put that in the actual, like the podcast information. And when we do the replay stuff, we'll make sure those resources are there. And I think it's also one of those things where you kind of think about, we were talking to Yetide last Friday about kind of what she's doing in the kind of the space right now that she's in to give back, and people in every single industry. Even yesterday, Byron was talking about how folks are collaborating digitally.
Yeah. For
you, and I've known you long enough, so I think I might know this answer, but interview is not for me. For you, like, how has your day-to-day shifted? Because again, you're still writing scripts. You still have your own personal projects. Because I want people to also know that even with these other houses, you have a creator-owned, like you have done creator-owned work. And so that's something I think is so amazing, because it's hard.
It is its own kind of beast.
Indeed, because there's no one there but you. you know, what does your day now look like when it comes to being able to structure that? Because I know we're quite similar. We like a good coffee shop.
Yeah, I like to go outside and be around people, even if I'm not talking to people. I have not been as productive as I would like, which usually I would beat myself up. I'm a person who is, you know, I've been working and hustling since I was 19. This is, I mean, this is no vacation. This is a nightmare. But you know, I'm so used to working at least 2 to 5 jobs at a time. So I have seen that kind of energy shrink down to what's right in front of me, which is totally acceptable. I'm trying to be kind to myself. I'm not usually kind to myself. It's acceptable for other people, so I'm going to say it's acceptable for myself. I have done something which I don't usually do, which is I've started to give myself me time in the morning, and then a little bit in the evening as well. So I've been whatever I want to do. Basically, I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing.
I knew you were about to say Animal. And this
So
entire
soothing.
show
So soothing.
has been a commercial for Tiger King and Animal Crossing. It's
No Tiger
so
King.
worrisome.
I needed something really gentle. You know, a lot of the stuff that I write, even the superhero stuff, it's conflict. It's a lot of conflict, and it's people going through emotions or going through, you know, physical conflict. And so I needed something on my off time that was not that. And I have a bunch of video games that are people beating each other up or people shooting each other and like all kinds of stuff. I like that stuff too. But I've needed something. Someone described Animal Crossing as like a bonsai. And I was like, yes, I just want, that's how like chill I need to be. Just gently pruning my bonsai. So I've been doing that. I've been reading more, which I hardly ever let myself read when it's not homework. I read a lot, but I read for homework. But now I'm just like, you know, I've been reading manga. I've been meaning to read for years. I read, you know, I buy my friends' books. I believe in supporting friends and stuff like that, as well as the people that you just admire. But like, so I've been buying my friends' books, and I had this read stack, and I'm slowly going through, you know, all the stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But you know, I've been trying to carve out things and time to make sure that I am able to function as a person. There's a lot of like, you know, real life stuff that I have to do, but I want to make sure that I'm giving myself enough gentle energy and support to be able to write to my best ability. I've always been someone who has taken comfort in work. I've always been someone who, whenever I'm processing something really difficult, I work, whether I'm going to get paid for it or not. So I am working on things that I'm probably not going to get paid for anytime soon, if ever, because I find comfort in that. Because if there's one thing that people can't take from me, it's what's going on in here and my ability to write it down on a piece of paper. Well, I guess that can be taken from me, but this is me. So as long as this is still going on, and as long as I am able to write things down, that's what I'll do. I've always done that compulsively. But I wanted to say too, like, if people aren't able to work in these times, that's okay. Like, there is no shame in that. If you are someone who, I suffer from crippling depression, so like that stuff isn't new to me. And so for people who have never experienced symptoms of like a severe depressive downturn, like, your feelings are valid, and you don't have to force yourself to do things that aren't immediately about your survival if you don't want to. That's okay. I just happen to be a person who, if I don't write something, I start to lose it and I'll start to crack. So I'm like, oh, it's time to start writing stuff down.
Well, and I love that, right? Because we've had this. If I were to like define your major superhero style, this is not all of the work you have done. It is complex characters and punching. Like it is
like
this is complex characters in a situation where they have to do major self-evaluation and punching.
I have a brand.
That and animal videos. Yes, you do. But you know, for those who are out there, it's like for me, like I've had this conversation with a couple folks. I love this combo series, and people are like, "Oh, you're being so productive," and I'm like, "This is my thing. This is the thing that I do every day to kind of give back to the conversation for folks to talk about, like 28 pages. This is my thing, right? For those out there who might be thinking about, okay, you know what? I keep saying that I'm going to write. And God bless you, because shout out for you being my Jedi writing master right now. Why
do you assume I'm not a Sith? I just don't. I'm not.
I mean,
why do you assume?
But also, maybe that's why we get along. I don't know. Maybe both our lightsabers are purple. I don't know. Nerd humor. Two people got that joke.
We appreciate both of them.
I'm so ridiculous right now.
Yeah, sorry.
My point being was, this happens every time we talk. It's fun. My point being was, for those who might be like sitting there, because I know, Quentin Peoples, who's actually going to be on the show later in April. He's a showrunner for Last Ship. He was one of the showrunners for Runaways. He just writes these big, beautiful, amazing scripts. Has started doing like script writing. He's like started offering a script writing class for free through Instagram, because that's his thing. For those whose thing is like, well, I'm going to put this pencil to paper. Like, how did you start writing? Like, where did it come from? But also, comic book writing is very different than all the rest of the writing. Sure. And talk a little bit about what comic book writing looks like versus what people normally would think about with prose or short stories or even creative fiction.
So I didn't really learn how to read until I was about 10 or 11. I learned very late because I am a fast talker and I could convince people that I knew what I was talking about. And I also went to a public school where we were just wild animals. So I moved from public school to Catholic school for 5th grade, and they were miles ahead. And so I had to learn how to read really, really quickly. But I'd always been telling myself stories like that. I have memories going back to about 9 months old, which is really weird. And I can't remember a time where I wasn't making stuff up or thinking through scenarios or building worlds. And so when I told myself how to read, I realized that I could get all of that stuff out of my head and into the physical world. And so I still have that first notebook somewhere, but I started just writing down my ideas just as they were coming to me. And I couldn't stop. I just had so much stuff in my head that I just had to write it down. And at first I would write little snippets of narrative, but for 3 years, it was just, oh, this is what this world looks like. And this is what these kind of people are, and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't really structured at first, but then when I entered the 8th grade, I changed schools again, and I met a teacher who was like, you're writing all the time, but you're not, you're just writing about stuff. Why don't you write? You tell all these stories out loud, and you have all these little details. Why don't you make a story, a narrative, write it down? Yeah. And so I started writing prose. And I actually came from writing short stories. They were my chosen medium. I really like short stories. I love all kinds of writing. But that was the one that appealed to me the most, because you get in, you tell your story, and you get out. And then when I was 19, I started working at Forbidden Planet, which was a comic book shop in New York City. And I realized, formative years of my life spent in that place. And up until then, I didn't really understand that you could write comics and not draw them. I read a ton of comics, but I also read a lot of manga. That was my preferred thing to take in at the time. And with manga, a lot of the time, the writer and artist are the same person. It's a cartoonist, right? But then I was working for Forbidden Planet, and we'd be putting comics on the wall, and I'd be like, there's so many names involved.
Why are there 12 editors and 3 pencilers? I don't understand.
Yeah, I was like, this is so confusing. And I realized, oh, I don't have to be able to draw. This is great, because I can't draw. When I draw, I accidentally summon demons. It's terrible. So I try very hard not to draw unless it's an emergency. That's my superpower.
I'm gonna start calling you Constantine if you ever say that again.
Bless. What a. That's exactly the kind of person that I am, TBH. But so I realized, I can start doing that, and so I started trying to find scripts, and at the time there were a couple of like script books that were published and all kinds of stuff, and I just started taking in as much of that behind the scenes stuff as possible. And so I started writing like little comics, and the first couple, I mean, I'm sure that there are people that say that everything I've written is garbage, so fair enough. But like, I look back on them and I'm like, well, the idea was sound, but the execution left a lot to be desired. I don't know if this is just because I came from prose or what, but like my first couple of comics were really tightly controlled, way too wordy. I was telling the artist way too much stuff. I was just like, okay, so and I thought, because I'm more of a textual thinker than a visual thinker. Mm-hmm. And so I would see, like, to me, I was like, a comic is in a grid and there's 9 of them. And so I have to like, I would describe like how many parts of the grid a panel should take up. It was way too much. I was young.
How did your illustrator do, your artist do? Because you're not the first. I have interviewed a number, and anybody knows my other day job. Like, I've interviewed a number of comic book writers who came from prose or short story. Your story,
we're too wordy.
Your story is not unique. A lot of people will say, I was like, what have you, like, I'll ask this like patent question. What have you learned since you've written now on your 3rd comic? They're like, let the artist do his job.
So I got on my second one that I had someone actually draw, I got the layouts back, and like the artist had made like snide comments in the layouts about stuff. And I was like, oh, and instead of hurting my feelings, I was just like, oh, I really need to relax. Like, I need to like pull back. Like, but you know, I think that like literally anything that is a skill and not an innate talent takes practice and takes work and takes experience. So, you know, I've noticed that a lot of people that come from prose and become, you know, start writing comic books, too wordy and too rigid. And then you relax as you go. I don't know, this is anecdotal, right? But I've seen people come from screenwriting into comics, and it's way looser. It's way more conceptual stuff. And I'm like, this is much closer. It's still not the same. No lo mismo, pero like, it's closer. It's closer. It's just closer. But yeah, I think for me, when I talk about writing to other people and kind of how I personally learned more and more about the craft, it was half of it was just reading a ton of scripts, which I hate. I hate reading scripts. I hate reading comic scripts. I hate reading my own scripts. I hate reading scripts. They're painful. It's so, the structures is not right for me. But I read, and I continue to read scripts by people that I admire and scripts by people that I don't think are very good, because I want to learn, like, what about the communication, like between the artist and the writer? Like, what happened there? Was it really just, was it the subject, or was it the way that it was being?
Interesting.
You know? But the other half, maybe more than half actually, is I talk to artists a lot. A lot of my siblings are visual artists, but also just in general, like I have every artist that I've worked with, I try and become friends with them because they're super cool and they have this skill that I don't have. And, you know, if we vibe, then I don't want to lose contact. And so I always ask, or I try as often as I can to ask, like, post the first script or post a project, like, hey, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? What can I do to make your life easier? And I asked that of like the line artists and the colorists and the letterers, like anyone on the team. Because I feel like I have, I think, the easiest job, but the scariest job, if that makes sense.
Well, you're driving the school bus. Like, I always joke that comics are a team sport, but normally the writer is driving the school bus to the away game, right? Like,
right.
You're like, yep. And then somebody's over there going, here's the map. And you're like, yep. Let me draw.
So we have to make up the map. Like, that's the thing. Like, my job is to, get the away team to the game safely. But there is no map. So I'm just like, I hope I do it. I hope this is what but but I don't have to play.
No,
comics is a visual medium.
You just get to chill. You're like, look, here's a script. So a curious thing that was one of the things that I always, because I've heard from you, I've heard this from Greg Pak, I've heard this like from a number of really successful comic book writers, go read scripts. And I'm like, when I first heard that, I was like, where'd this one find? Like, unless someone like Donnie Cates loves sharing his scripts. So like, look, like some people just like, here's a script, or you could get it from a director's cut and the script is in there. But like, what is your source for finding scripts in that manner? Because it's not the same as if a screenwriter puts a script out. You can find those almost anywhere. Or is it?
So I have 3 sources. One, there is a comic book script archive. You can just literally Google comic script archive, and it'll take you. And it's where creators have donated scripts to this place so that they're centralized and people can find them easily. 2, there's a bunch of writers that have Patreons that will put snippets of scripts or even whole scripts up. I know for the most part, it is like kosher to put up a script even for a licensed thing as long as it's already come out.
Okay.
Which I should update my Patreon and just start putting up scripts. and
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And then the third is I have a lot of writer friends, and sometimes I ask them for their scripts. I think it's important to read scripts because not for the content and not necessarily even for nitty-gritty structure stuff, but what I'm interested when I'm reading a script is how it's communicating the idea to the person that has to read the script. I'm a writer, not the artist, but I think I still count. So are you able to clearly get across the tone, the major action, all that kind of stuff, without it being a slog to get through the scripts? Your script, to me anyway, is a love letter to your artist. Like, here, I appreciate you, and so these are the things that I think you can do because you're amazing. Because it's true. I think that artists are like sorcerers. I don't know how they do it.
I mean, you've worked with some pretty incredible artists, right? Like,
I'm blessed as hell. I got to tell you, there has been no project where I haven't been happy.
Like, I'm pretty sure at least one of your artists has an Eisner. So,
yeah, I don't. It's one of those things where you can never deserve to be able to work with someone like that, but I can be grateful that I've. But so, like, to me, the script is not for the editor. The script is certainly not for the readers. The script is for the artist. You are having a conversation with this person. Some people are better at communicating things than others. So I want to incorporate as much stuff that I think will make that easier to, that line of communication easier. I think that it was Joelle Jones that said this, but I could be wrong. So if I'm attributing it incorrectly, I'm sorry. But I asked, what do you want in a script? What do you want in a script? And she said, give me an emotion, give me an action, and get the hell out of my way. And I was like, it's a great way to describe it. It's great. So I changed the way that I script based on comments like that. So what I tend to do is just the anatomy of like a page to me is I'll do an introduction to the script to just to like, hey, this is who I am. This is how I write. If you want me to change it, just let me know. It's really important to me that my artist knows like right away, like, this is mostly your show. I'm just trying to do my best to get you information. But then I'll talk about the general kind of themes for whatever issue that we're working on. I think it's really important to have that front loaded in your mind as you go into the project, right? I think one of the best pieces of advice that I got was never surprise your artist ever. It's not your job to surprise the artist. They should know everything that they need to know going in. So I give all like the thematic stuff and like the emotional stuff up front. That's usually, all of that combined is usually a page, which they can read once and then never read again if they don't want to. And then I move into the actual script itself, and I will, I'll tell you what page it is and how many panels there are on this page, with the caveat of change how many panels are on this page if you want to. And then I give as much tonal information as necessary for the page. Just the page.
So say a little bit more for those who may not be familiar. When you say tonal information, like Because again, I say this, and it really is my true belief in why I love comics so much. It's a team sport, and
for sure.
a lot of this, people don't realize it doesn't happen in a bullpen anymore.
No.
Back in the 70s and 80s, comic books generally would happen in the bullpen. Sometimes you'd have artists here and there that could work remotely, but they'd be mailing in panels. So it would take so long that generally there was a point in time where the writer and the artist were in the same space at the same time. That's not the case anymore.
I'm sad that I never got to experience that. I've had like some experiences with friends like that, but never the real bullpen, which is a bummer. So like, yeah, you can't walk over and be like, hey buddy, like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Here's the vibe. You know what I mean? Anymore. I jump on the phone with my collaborators whenever they want. And sometimes when I want to. But generally you kind of have to let each other just work. You don't really, people live in different time zones. People live in different countries. You may not, there may be communication barriers where you have an agent translating, or someone will, be able to read text better than they can, have live conversation.
Yeah. And
I speak only one language well, and then one language, passably. So I myself, the failing is on me. But, so I want to give as much of the feeling and the kind of context for a page as possible before I go into panel descriptions. So tone for me includes things like, it does include things like setting and time of day and all this stuff, but also like, hey, this is a somber page because this, or hey, we're going to have, it's going to start low energy, but then last panel, we're going to have like an explosion of energy. Just keep that in mind. Or if there's something that needs to be seated in the page for a later page or even a later issue, I'll put it in that. Be like, hey, keep in mind, this briefcase has to be here. And this is kind of where it is. That's an example, right? And then I go into panel descriptions. Again, always, I'm like, change it if you want to. But now you have the information that I think is important and you can just do whatever you want. So like, again, emotion, action, bounce. Like, At be like, Morbius, our sad, angsty vampire boy is looking at he's standing at his science table with his hands pressed against the table, looking real worn out. He's thinking these thoughts. And that won't necessarily be what's in a caption. It'll just be like, well, when you're thinking certain things, you might make an expression or whatever. Yeah. And that's just like, that's it. That's how I roll. Sometimes when I've been working with someone for a while, like Claire Rowe, we're working on Nebula together. I'll do something like page 6, 5 panels, ? And I'll just have like, hey, this is a fight scene. By the end of it, this should happen. It would be cool if you incorporated these things, like whatever. And I'll have like a paragraph or two. And I'm like, go with God. Like, because we know each other so well. So she knows kind of what I'm thinking, but also she's the artist. I don't know I can't draw. Like you do it, do whatever you want. Like, and I know that she will add more panels than I, script for, because she likes to do big splashy action with like little highlights and stuff. And I'm like, I don't even know how to script that.
Yeah. Do what you do so well.
Yeah.
I want to hop into a couple of questions. So Kat Calvin, favorite comic that people may not have heard of, we should read while we're in our bunkers. Oh, Kat Calvin.
Good question. I don't know what people are reading these days, but what have I been reading that I thought was really, really good? I just borrowed, this might be one that a lot of people don't know, this from my neighbor. We are in an isolation pod because there are only like 3 apartments, and we're all very good friends. So this book is awesome. It is really intense and really painful, but it is also evocative in a way that gives you hope. I'm just like a third of the way through, but it's changing my life. I read Abbott by Saladin Ahmed recently. I loved it.
Such a good book.
Oh, so good. I'm trying to think. What did I My default is always Hellboy, so I'm always going to tell people to go read Hellboy because I think it's really good.
I've
I have
learned
a Hellboy
something new today.
tattoo. Like,
Learned something new today. Wow.
But yeah, those are some. If you are looking for anything specific, I'm sure that I could, like, if you comment like YA or sci-fi or whatever. If you can find it, it is a little difficult to find, but Saturn Apartments is a manga that is both it's bittersweet. It's basically, it's very apropos. Humanity has made the Earth unlivable, and so we created this ring of a like space station around the Earth, and we live there now. And it's about this kid who becomes a window washer for the apartments. It's really cute, but there's a lot of stuff in there that's really emotionally resonant, and they talk a little bit about kind of what's going on the Earth, but mostly it's about how people do come together and help each other when the chips are down. So it's really hopeful and very cute, very sweet.
All right, so Amy Laura, having written a post-apocalyptic series like The Wilds, flowers, zombies, does the genre lose its appeal or interest for you while living through a pandemic situation?
I have wanted desperately to write more of The Wilds right now. It's just it's one of my favorite universes to play in. It's weird because I don't want to read any post-apocalyptic prose at all. Like I too much. That's too much. But I did just watch Girl with the Gifts. Like,
You did? You watched it? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so excited about that movie.
I loved it. I loved it so much.
Also written by another comic book writer. The comic book writer wrote the book.
I just ordered the book from an independent bookstore. I'm super excited for it to come in. Although I don't know if I'll be able to read it because it's just been so stressful. But I've been watching we've been watching a bunch of horror movies and a bunch of like that kind of stuff. And I'm enjoying that because there's catharsis there. But for me, and I'll probably read some more post-apocalyptic comics if I can, I'll see what I have. But for me, prose takes so long, which is good. But I don't want to live in the like headspace of like the downward spiral before the peak. So like, I love it. I'm happy to write it right now. I don't want to read the prose, but go see Girl with the Gifts. It's on Netflix right now. It's really good.
It's so good. Like, honestly, I did a Geeksplain for sci-fi. I guess 2 years ago. And my friends all know I'm obsessed with zombies. I'm also obsessed with Richard Matheson. You know this. I'm
both
always same. And it's such an interesting twist. And the thing I like about that particular movie is it did what none of the directors in any of the I Am Legend movies did, which was allow the actual resolution to happen. I'm not going to spoil it, but in every single version of I Am Legend, there was a complete departure away from what Matheson was trying to get across in the book. And I always thought it was very interesting. And the reason why I loved Girl with the Gifts so much is that they were brave enough to let it happen.
That movie, this will become a live stream about that movie because I loved it so much. But the way that they introduce the children and the way that they progress the story from there, I think that was so brilliant. So yeah, I'm enjoying post-apocalyptic fiction just of a visual
nature. So we are still taking questions. So if you want to put it in your comments in YouTube, we're on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook. Just put them there in the comments. I will get all of them at the same time. They come in this magical chat thingy that tells me where you are and who you are. And I think, the next question is kind of like thinking back on that understanding of knowing that you can handle visual, but you can't really handle prose right now. And I know prose has been hard for me because ironically, I am more mentally visual when reading prose than I am when I am watching a show. What are you doing right now to keep, because I know you talked a little bit about that me time in the morning and me time in the evening. Like, what else are you doing right now that you've adjusted? Because now we're 3 weeks in, so we've had a chance to kind of fill this and feel as an FEEL, not FILL, fill this thing out. Like, what are you personally implementing that's keeping you grounded as an artist?
I'm reading for pleasure, and I think that is. Everyone talks about how important it is, and it is, but we never take our own advice. But I'm starting to take that advice because not only was the well running dry, but also I got to a point where I was like, why am I even working anymore? The one thing I've always wanted to do with my life, there have been two things, and that's connect with people and help people. I've had many, many jobs, and most of them were revolved around service of some sort. And I was sitting here, in my pajamas, probably. I started getting dressed again also, which is very important.
Very important.
Ooh, it makes a difference. But I was sitting here and I was like, why am I even writing these scripts? Like, what's the point? Will anyone even care? And so I was like, all right, I need to take a day off, which I also never do. I never take weekends off. I never take evenings off. I just work all the time. My wife is long suffering. And
your brilliant wife, who I hope is
She's
an
the best.
earshot. I love her so much. Thank you for letting me borrow your spouse.
She keeps me one of these. But I finally was like, I need a break. I just need a break. And so I was like, I'm going to read a chapter of something a day or a graphic novel a day of normal size, not like an omnibus. That's too much. And so I started doing that. And that reminded me that, like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a sanitation worker. I'm not a grocery store clerk. I'm not someone out there, like, putting my life on the line and helping people in that way. But the things that I'm consuming right now are helping me. These books are helping me. You can't really find comfort. Maybe you can find comfort. They're not necessarily comforting me, but they're reminding me that people want to connect with other people. And so doing that really kind of reinvigorated my desire to work again, because I can only do what I'm capable of, but I want to do it as well as possible. And I found that inspiration again from reading a bunch of books. So, and watching movies too. I've always wanted to make, like, television and movies, but yeah. I wish I had more profound answers. What I'm finding is that the mundane things are really giving me hope, and doing little mundane things are actually keeping me moving. Also spending time with my wife and my friends, because again, we're in an isolation pod. We've been quarantining ourselves for a month now.
Wow. And I love it. And your cats.
And my cats, my boys.
Look who just popped into the chat. You know what? I was gonna start winding this down, but hey, Danny Roth, aka Danny Ordinary, both with two N's.
Both with one N.
Oh, wait, dang it. You know what, guys? It's time for me to have afternoon snack, clearly.
I know, I haven't had lunch yet.
Woo. Also, in this reality, we mess up and it's fine. So if you were to write a Star Trek Voyager story, you're being very specific, and I feel like this is coming from another conversation about
B'Elanna Torres.
I know, like, this is real specific, Danny.
So Danny knows that. So a little context. When I was a teenager, when I was 15, I was really, really sick, and I spent every single night in the ER for about 10 months. It was pretty rough. And during that time, Voyager was in syndication, I guess, and it was playing in the waiting room. So I would watch Voyager every single night, and it got to the point where I would still be scared because I didn't know what was going on in my body, but I would have that to look forward to. So I was like, okay, it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to go and we're going to see, Captain Janeway and B'Elanna Torres and all my favorites do stuff. And Danny knows that. So, and B'Elanna's my favorite character on the show. So even though Voyager is not the best Star Trek, I acknowledge that it is my favorite Star Trek because it it gave me something to hope for.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Danny. But what would you write? What would be the story?
There are two stories that I would want to do for Balana. One would be her academy days leading into her joining the Maquis. She wasn't in Starfleet Academy for very long, but she was there for a while. And then she just kind of got radicalized and left. And I find that really fascinating. And you get bits and pieces of it throughout the series, but like I would really love to like sit down and like write about that. She's wonderful. She's a Hispanic in space. I love her so much. And the other, I would love to retcon her marriage to Tom Paris. So I guess I would love to write about her divorce and her finding herself and being happy. But that is just the pettiness in me. Just a little bit. She can do better. I said it. Flyboy ain't nothing. So yeah, those are two of the many stories that I would love to write about Balana Torres.
Oh, well, I feel you. My favorite Star Trek is OG. It's problematic as heck.
But
it's not the best, but
there's something so when I'm sick, I actually watch OG Star Trek. Like that's my like
it's so wonderfully hokey.
It is, but also there's all this stuff like we look back on it now and like yeah, there was a lot of problems, but also they were pushing the edge on so many things where they didn't have to. Like, and it was propelled by the people involved. And I find that beautiful.
Well, and I think it's, and we could have a whole conversation dealing with the different structures of how TV was back then, and that TV was really ruled on a very substantial level by the sponsors, and to the fact that the sponsors had so much control that they could actually be mentioned in the theme song each week, and because they paid for the advertisement, it would literally shift which shows would be played and if shows would get canceled. And so I think there's just such an interesting dynamic of what was happening with segregation and integration and the civil rights movement.
Listen, the story that Nichelle Nichols tells about like
MLK.
I cried. I actually burst into tears. I was listening to it on a podcast and I was like, I was not ready for this. That tells you something about the power of like media and the power of stories, which is like, that's my soapbox, right? Like I'm always like, stories are important. Stories are how we persist, and stories is how we build community, right? Especially, and across the board, humans across the board, let me be clear. But also there is something to be said about like people of the diaspora as well, because the only thing they couldn't take from us were the stories that we told each other, right? And so like the power of story is so fundamental to us as a species. And Star Trek being something like just as a franchise, but also just as individual kind of like smaller shows that push boundaries, that's incredible to me. And it's a show with like terrible makeup and like awful sets, but I don't care. It's great.
Awful or innovative? I don't know. Clearly, if you watch Doctor Who long enough, you watch the black and white Doctor Who long enough.
I like the black and white.
And then you go watch OG Star Trek. OG Star Trek was like a billion years.
You can see the strings on the ships.
All right. Oh, okay, guys. We would literally be here
forever,
all day talking about Star Trek. Thanks, Danny Roth. We love you and adore you. But for those who want to follow you and follow all of the great things that you are doing, tell the people where to find you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Definitely Vita, and I'm on Instagram as well, although that's private. Same at Definitely Vita. I have a Patreon, which I'm not collecting money for, so now's the time to join. There's a bunch of stuff up there. And I'll be putting more stuff on there too. Just trying to create content to like soothe people. So I'm finding like the most gentle kind of content to create right now.
I love it. Well, stay tuned tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're actually going to be talking to Brian Joseph Lee, who is a producer and does a lot of community engagement and involvement at the Public Theater. And we'll be talking about how folks in theater and how folks who are producers and writers and creators and stage writers are shifting and building community right now as well. Just because, you know, theater is shuttered right now. But a lot of folks are doing incredible stuff. I don't know if folks have seen like the Hamilton stuff. So we'll be talking a lot about that tomorrow and how creativity is finding our way, or as Byron Isaacs said it yesterday, finding its way through the concrete, which I absolutely love. Thank you for tuning in today, and we will see you tomorrow.